Okay, Nick, go for it.
Well, thank you all for coming today. I am bringing up the Salt Extensions community repository that Alyssa put some notes in here for our agenda today. All right, so today is the 21st of March. As always, we will be recording this and it'll show up on the Salt Extensions playlist. So take a look at YouTube and find all of our past meetings there. Let's see. So just a reminder that our new meeting cadence is the first and third Thursday. That has been updated on the Salt Project calendar. So if you go to saltproject.io, you can see the specific dates and times and the Zoom link. Let's see. Oh, Alyssa will be on vacation and we'll miss our next meeting on April 4th. So um, I'll have to do my best Lisa impression on saying hello to everybody and taking good notes and generally being awesome. Um, and so this is probably the biggest thing that we've talked about recently, and then also need to cover, and that is um, how to do documentation for these salt extensions. So just to set the stage, right? We're going from a spot where everything was in the core. Documentation was added to the core in order to document the different modules and maybe put like um, uh, installation, configuration, tutorials, things like that, all in one place. And that way you could go to a single location and look up all of the module documentation that you might need. Now, with creating separate repositories for all of these different modules in order to create salt extensions, um, there's been a lot of concern and questions on how we're going to handle that, um, and still have some sort of cohesive direction for documentation going forward. So I think we have a lot of good folks that can chime in on this call, and so without further ado, I'll open up the floor to anybody that wants to talk a little bit more about maybe some ideas that they might have on how to do documentation right for uh, the salt extensions.
I
Lisa dropped the proposal from Max into the chat. That is a salt discussion. Um, so that's salt discussion 66144. And I'm not sure if everybody is taking a look at that, but if you have some time to read through it while we're sort of diving in, definitely do that.
and I don't know if you want to talk about it, Max, or anything like that, or summarize it.
Yeah, I guess I can summarize it quickly. So the basic idea is whether it's possible to keep the familiar user experience when everything is in one place. Offline documentation keeps working. The documentation can serve as an extension discovery mechanism, like new extensions can opt in to publish their documentation on docs.saltproject.io. Like common module namespace, it will help to avoid module name collisions if someone comes up with this new module name. He can consult the existing namespace of the documentation and prevent some conflicts from happening. And that's basically it. Oh, and probably like every page for an extension that's not in core can have a clear header that points to the issue tracker some extension status, maybe like link to the repository and stuff like that. That's it.
Yeah, so I took a look a little bit at the proposal and talked to some of the core team members, and because we also had a similar issue come up when we were looking at Item Project, because Item Project was a plugin based approach that meant a lot of decentralized repositories, and that meant a lot of isolated documentation. And what would the strategy be to allow them to still be standalone, but try to create a better docs experience? And I think we want to do better than how it was done with Item Project, because with Items case, all those plugins that we have listed were really all maintained by us. And so we had kind of the full control over what was going into each repo. And as a result, it was a lot easier to have the decision of using shared CI/CD for publishing docs to like docs.itemproject/somewhere. And but in regard to salt extensions, so there's a few things that come up for me. One is that I definitely think it makes sense that inside the core docs, when you come up to the Pi modules, if they have been pulled out into an extension, there should at a minimum be a link out to this no longer exists inside a core salt. Here is where you can find the documentation for this project. And I don't know, I don't have much experience with inner Sphinx, but there's a module of Sphinx that allows you to kind of link out to and connect to docs of different projects. And I could see that being what would be useful there, so that when people are used to going to look at a particular module in the core documentation, docs.saltproject.io/wherever, that they have at least a jumping off point to get there. One problem with trying to get them into the docs there, that similar experience, is Sphinx. It's a bit challenging. And even if we're going to be using the core managed extensions, I think what would be the least burden would be to reevaluate what's being used at the extension saltproject.io, to have at a minimum at least a listing or jumping off point, so that people could see all the extensions that exist, and like what you listed, Max, in relation to a link to the repo and issue tracker, and some of that main status information for a repo, because that landing page then could have an opt-in mechanism that's GitHub based to onboard a extension to ensure that, hey, has it met its particular requirements. And I know that Nick, it sounds like you guys have worked on having centralized, standardized GitHub workflows in the community org to try to have a standard way of with CI/CD that I imagine might also include the run this command to see do the docs build, or at least it could hypothetically go to check if can docs build properly. No, I know I just word dumped, because I'm going to be putting a lot of this response. I want to make sure, based on this discussion that we have, into that GitHub discussion, so that it can continue there too. But from my perspective, it's very hard. The burden, it's challenging to do it, to go, let's have it into where the current docs are, so that the extensions kind of just get plugged in, and the docs are easily embedded. And because you run into things where, what happens when the docs are broken on a particular repo? What happens when a particular salt extension wants to list multiple versions? of its documentation. What happens when you want to integrate it with a larger search? All of these are problems we have historically run into that Sphinx can have trouble with. And sites like Read the Docs have built-in automation that have tried to help with this. Like I could see one option where, let's say, the community has let's say a single repo that pulls in community extensions and wants to build a single site that kind of has them all there. I believe Read the Docs supports that using submodules, and they might even support, as a result, integrated search across them. But the community would actually even be eligible, I think, for Algolia type search integration, where you could have decentralized docs all collectively put into one search pool, while Salt Project itself is not eligible for it because we are sponsored by Broadcom. Before I say any more, those are some initial thoughts, and I know there was a lot there, and so I want to make sure not to just keep talking, because there was a lot, and we could address specific points together.
But it's so soothing to listen to you talk.
I was going to make
to fall asleep or anything.
I was going to make a joke of like, welcome to Derek's TED Talk, everybody. No, I'm just teasing though. Lots of good stuff there. Plenty to process. I wonder, where should we start with that?
I feel like, we having like a tiered wish list of, hey, it would be awesome if it like the core and core extensions and community extensions were all together in one place, and were searchable, and we could just like do things like we do them today, right? Like that's probably the number one on the list. And that, I think that's the kind of the core of what Max is going for, right? And I think that from a user experience, it's definitely the best outcome. But what would be other options if we can't do that, right? So, I think Derek brought up a good option as a fallback, and that's trying to do some sort of centralized documentation from the community standpoint, so at least all of that stuff is together, and then maybe we can find some way to link out to core maintained things as well, so that like people can just go to the community extensions as a single point and say like, hey, I'm looking for something that does this. Where would that reside? And if we have knowledge that it's in the core and it just like links out to some other location, then at least it serves that purpose of discoverability from a single point, not having to go to multiple locations. The fallback off of that would be some sort of community only centralized stuff, and then the fallback off of that would be just fulfilling the need of creating module documentation somewhere, right? So like if we had some sort of like Read the Docs template or something like that that gets copied out, or some CI/CD process that it goes through. I'm not a Read the Docs guy, so I don't know a whole lot about how it does its thing, but if we can have some sort of easy to onboard process that people can just get their individual documentation up someplace so that they can see it, that's one thing, right? But like it's definitely not ideal because it's all decentralized and not easy to discover. So you're still back at, I need to go potentially 2 to 3 different places in order to find what modules are there. Or I could go to PyPy and just see like a listing of things that might be named in a way that we can tell that they're salt extensions. So that's kind of my thoughts on outcomes.
Does anyone have some experience with how it's done in other open source projects like Ansible, Terraform? There are also division between the core stuff and community stuff, whether it's integrated or it's also decentralized.
Terraform has its concept of providers where it has this central registration point, where even things that are like non-HashiCorp created can be registered as like a known and vetted provider. I'm not sure how they accomplish that, but they do have that central registration type of deal. And Ansible has Ansible Galaxy, where people can do something similar. If we went down that road, it would be like its own application. I would assume, like, we're basically building a web application that does this stuff. So then, we would have lots of questions like, who's hosting for this? Who's hosting this? Who's getting the bill for it? Things like that.
Well, we see it too in every Linux distro. You have the official repositories, then you have community repositories, or unofficial ones. Maybe it could work somewhat like that. You could add any arbitrary repository that follows the same rules and has a collection of extensions.
Yeah. There was a point in the past where we were looking at, so to have a unified look, for example, we were looking at starting to adopt the Firo theme across a subset of our salt docs, and same with item docs. So what you'll see with like the salt install guide and the salt user guide, they've been moved over to Firo. That has started to become used by quite a lot of Python projects, and we found so that there can be a distinct look, but when it comes to Portal, when we were working on Firo, we had a developer let go who was helping us with creating some unification there. And we initially were also looking at creating a web portal similar to what you're talking about, Nick, before more layoffs happened and we actually lost people working on that. So from our perspective, we've kind of lost all people with those specializations and focus from a core team perspective on setting up customized development and web app type functionality, because that was kind of one of the ones we were looking at due to how Ansible Galaxy and Terraform work. There are other projects that do it, but because they have dedicated quite a bit of effort into having that a platform, it's made it easier for other people to work through while we don't have a platform. And like you said, that would mean if that gets looked into, would that be who would own it, who would be developing it, where would it be maintained, where would it be hosted? Those would be questions that we'd have to evaluate.
It is helpful to know what we can't do, and so that's a helpful piece of discussion. And it's also helpful to just go forward with the assumption that we won't have resources to invest into this, so we have to make do with what we have and whatever the community has the capacity to do. With that in mind, I'd love to return to Nick's idea. I would almost like, I like your tiered list. I would maybe just invert it a little bit and say, what's our minimum viable product? Like, what's the minimum like workable solution we can get to just have something, and define what that is and how we could get to just a minimum. And then from there we can iterate and improve and kind of build on top of that and make it gradually better over time. And so I think maybe starting with a minimum viable solution, could be good. As my initial thoughts on that would be to just like, again, kind of like have a carrot, like for getting people into your centralized repository, Nick, possibly. And like having that be an awesome list, and having certain requirements that people have to have in order to be there, like maybe having a few documentation standards for what people have to like, and it doesn't have to be heavy, but just something to just say, these are our expectations for docs if you're going to host or link out from this centralized repository. Yeah, like I think I don't have a real strong opinion about what that minimum viable solution should look like, but that's probably what we should work towards. And I'll yield to Pedro.
So with the thought of that inverted wish list and the minimum viable product, since the Salt Extensions organization exists, it also has the capability of being accessed by saltextensions.github.io for a static website, like we do for our blogs. And for example, I host my blog on GitHub, and GitHub serves my static blog. So I think the minimal viable product could be a static website that has a listing of the known extensions with links out, probably some description of what it is, what it does, and then a link out to the actual documentation of that extensions documentation that can be hosted wherever that user has decided. Like this would be like the minimal, the bare minimum, like a list. And someone creating an extension or adopting an extension can make a PR against that repo and saying, look, I've been working on this. I would like to include this in the list. It's kind of an awesome list like we see for many projects out there. So an awesome list for Python, an awesome list for Rust, whatever. There are a few lists of awesome lists out there. And so the idea would be to kind of create such a list for us and the Salt extension users, but it would be a static website. I think that's the minimum. Another thing that I would like to make it quite clear is that code getting extracted from Salt should have a stub document redirecting users. So like if we miss something like that, we should consider that a bug and something that we, the core team, have to fix. And we have to figure out a way to keep those stubs and get them included in our documentation. That's as far as I would go into like merging documentation, because merging documentation can be quite cumbersome. Let's put it like this. But with regards to what's getting extracted, we definitely have to have link outs. We already have like a decorator with the information for the module. So when the module loads, and we issue warnings when users are trying to use those modules, maybe we can create a Sphinx extension that extracts data from there to create the stubs. That's a way. Another way is actually creating the documentation stubs that redirect to the user's website, to the extensions, at least repo at the bare minimum. But yeah, that would be like the bare minimum. The proof of concept that was created a while back actually pulled down everything from PyPy. It inspects the keywords of the project to try and figure out if it was a Salt extension or not. That has been broken for quite some time because we were relying on GitHub to do the hard work for us. Sadly, like Alyssa mentioned, like we don't have resources to resurrect that. So probably like a fresh start or a fresh new approach to something like that could be done to automate, but I believe that would be like on the second tier of the wish list. Like, let's collect what are known extensions and pull their docs, etc., and then build that static website. But I think that we should try to keep it as much as possible on the free tier, meaning let's use like GitHub pages, like read the docs and stuff like that, because the question of who picks up the build is a very important question that sadly we cannot respond to, at least right now. We can definitely try internally, but I think it's going to be really hard.
So I'm gonna cut in line real quick, just to ask one question off of a piece of what Pedro just said. So currently there's like one PR I think that that DWAS is working on where he's pulling stuff out of the core, and at some point that'll get merged. I'm not aware that it has been yet, but as part of that PR, can we ensure that while he's pulling out the modules that we have those stubs created already that at least say like, hey, this is going to the community, and then we can provide links later. So at least that there's like a framework in place that we know we can go back and edit to include the end destination of the documentation for a particular extension or module.
Including more stuff on that. So for example, I tried to review that PR and GitHub is not working with me. Like my browser just keeps crashing. And yes, I have an old laptop, but it's what I have. And so what I say that we could do is like once that gets merged, like immediately after, go after the changes and include those subs, just so that we don't overload even further that pull request.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's quite a reasonable request to at least say, look, this extension got moved out. This is where it lives. Like that's the bare minimum.
Can you take that action, or somebody else from the core team take that action to ensure that that occurs, whether like an issue is created for it to track or something like that?
Yeah, I think we can. You're taking notes, Alyssa, right?
Yep, I am. Who wants to take the action item to just bring it up with the core team?
I can.
Okay, thanks, Pedro. That'd be great.
If I don't, please remind me.
Will do.
I keep saying that the age is starting to play tricks on me, but hopefully I won't forget that.
Sounds good.
No, I won't forget that. But yeah, if enough time has passed and I haven't mentioned, yeah, please feel free to remind me.
Hey,
Please.
I'll hold you accountable.
Yeah, please do.
Thanks, Pedro. I think, Megan, it's your turn.
So I've been playing around with a GitHub static page for the last day or so, and based on our salt extensions repos that we already have, I have kind of built a template that I guess all future extensions could also use. And then GitHub has like you can create a template repo that you can use as I guess a starting point for any future repos. And then on top of that, I've also been playing around with a GitHub action that basically builds all the documentation. Well, first it installs everything, all the dependencies, and then it uses Sphinx to build the documentation, and then it can push the changes over to like a central documentation repo that is a static page. And then in there, I'm using, I don't know what it's called, but talk tree. Is that what it's called, Nick?
The table of contents tree.
Yeah. And then I'm putting all the former or all of the links to the other docs in there. And that's on the static page. So in terms of like minimally viable product, that seems to be like a good start. And I got it up and running in just a couple hours. It is not pretty by any means, but it's functionally there. So I just wanted to say that I have kind of been playing around with that idea already. So, and the
You-
GitHub Actions is I mean, a good place where you can just kind of in each repo just have it run and send it to one place, and it builds everything for you and all that. So
Do you have a repository set up somewhere that we could take a look at the initial proof of concept?
I could get that set up. Yeah, it's very ugly, but yeah, I could get that out today, probably.
That's cool. It might be fun when you're ready, no pressure, wait for it to stabilize and things like that. But it might be fun to have you do a demo for this group when you're feeling ready, like it's worthy to show, that kind of thing. And when you think it could be worth evangelizing, I suppose. And if you're interested, we could also take it to the big time at open hour in a future open hour. Again, the timetable for this is flexible. You don't have to feel like it's today or anything like that. So
You have an hour to get it ready.
yep. Open hours in 1 hour. Can you get it ready? No.
No pressure.
No. When you feel like it's in a good state.
Okay.
That's really cool, by the way. I want to say that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very like bare bones right now, but function, I'm just trying to do function first rather than looks. And I am learning as I go, so we'll see how it all works out in the end.
I will
Yeah.
say, oh yeah, sorry, Derek, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just gonna say, you two should talk, Derek and Megan. Like Derek might be able to offer some insights or things like that if you do get stuck, but I will let you talk, Derek.
Well, I was going to say that I think that when we're talking about standards too, for cross extensions, and I think, and Tyler, I think should talk about this in a little bit if he's, oh yeah, you're here. That when looking at the salt extensions tools, and I saw that there was a community contributed one that uses like Copier, for example, and that if we had in baseline extensions, see, I haven't actually played with what a baseline extension looks like when it comes to docs, when you first create a new one, or what like the community extensions look like right now. I've been kind of working on a lot of other things, and it'd be interesting to see what work could be done to, you know, does it already get bootstrapped with like ephemeral auto mod documentation build out, so that when you create execs modules or states, does it automatically create a tree associated with all of those in the docs? And if it doesn't, could improvements be put into place? And
It currently does create like a little tree for you based upon what types of modules you're using. Additionally, it manages like the conf.py and things like that, so that copier template could be used to set themes, or include any other stuff that we might want to standardize on. And the copier template's pretty easy to use, right? Like, it's just like, hey, copier, I'm on this version now, and it makes all of the changes for you. So we've been using that to update some of the existing extension modules. Now we probably need to put some process in place to like see where certain extensions are in the copier life cycle in order to like try and put PRs in to keep them kind of up to date with what the standard is at a given time. But I think that using that community maintained copier template would be a really good way of tracking all of that, at least in lieu of something better.
So
Yeah.
a question, a question.
ahead.
Sorry, Derek. Nicholas, you've been way more involved than at least me with regards to extensions. The salt extension tool was like the first iteration, and by all means, it's not the best, and it's hard coded, and it's hard to extend, which I believe the copier one is not. I assume that you've played around with both of them. And is it fair to say that copier is way easier and way more flexible and way more updatable than the one that we have?
Yeah, it has some things built into it that, you know, we would have to write in, right, in the other tool. So I think living inside of a different tool as like a template or plugin or whatever you want to call it, just gives us access to everything that framework provides with very little effort on our side.
Okay, so I'm personally, I can take this to the core team, but personally, I'm really okay to just deprecate our tool in favor of copier, especially if it's getting more widely used, and just remove one question from anyone that tries to create a salt extension. Like, oh, I have two tools, which one do I use? Like, we remove those questions off the bat. If it's ready for prime time, I think we should redirect users from our tool to the one that's getting used.
And I have two things to add to that. Is one is, by the way that looks, that tooling looks, is that would probably, I imagine, also be the way that you could introduce updates to standardized like GitHub workflows, GitHub action workflows. So that looks really awesome, because I bet as you add more over time, it'll be a lot easier for people to spin something up. I mean, I could even see you doing something similar to, well, I don't know, is that Nick, is that tool right now owned by the Salt Extensions org, or is that just by a single user right now?
By a single user right now. GitHub handle is LKUBB, I think. That's Jean-Luc on the Salt Stack community Slack.
Okay, I could see it. It might be interesting in the future to see about whether they'd be interested in it being under, I don't know, the Salt Extensions community, if it if tooling wise, yeah.
The issue where actually the pull request that he submitted to fix some problems with our tool, and that's where I got acquainted with the copier template. I think he actually mentioned that he would be okay with moving that into the org, the Salt Extensions org. But yeah, we should definitely reach out, see if he still has that interest.
Okay.
And at least that gets centralized, I'd say.
Yeah, I can take that action to get with him and see if we can roll it in.
The other thing I saw, since I don't have experience with this tooling, but it sounds like you're able to run the latest version of it on an existing repo that may have been created with an earlier version of it, correct? To kind of see if there'd be a diff.
That's correct.
I could actually see the potential for experimental GitHub action workflows similar to how Dependabot works, where Dependabot goes through and goes, I see, here's some differences. I could see a potential experiment with, here's a GitHub action workflow running with the latest version of that tool, and this repo actually could see updates here, here, and here. But
Or a pre-commit or something.
oh, perhaps that too. But that though, I did want to make sure Tyler's been working on this idea that I think he should really share, that may make it easier for the creation of modules in the future. And he has a proof of concept he's been working on that I think would be beneficial to share with those on the call for feedback.
I did show Nick yesterday, and I did get some feedback.
Okay,
Gareth
cool.
had written a tool that used the Git filter repo and then the Salt copier tool, which are actually the next steps that I was going to do. So to not reinvent the wheel and do the work, I want you to do a little bit more integration of what's been done before I'm ready to show.
Sounds good.
probably next week or next.
Cool. Well, then as a quick recap of what it is that Tyler's working on is just making it easier to go, I want these subset of modules to be pulled out into an extension, and can I get a repo bootstrapped with those exact modules, tests, and state modules while retaining the Git history. So it seemed like a cool way to help people in the future. So yeah. Actually, one of the questions I did have, Max, I saw that you mentioned one of your thoughts was you wanted to make sure it still worked with, there's like there are these offline tool doc sets, Dash, Zeal, Velocity, that seem to use some kind of automation to collectively pull in target documentation so that you can have an offline tool to easily search across those docs, if I understand how they work correctly.
Yes, they have. I haven't looked at in detail how it works, but basically they can ingest HTML sites, and I think they can ingest Markdown, RST, whatever. They strip the markup and try to index it and publish on special tool-specific repository. You can install it as a doc set, and it will be completely offline experience.
Yeah,
that was one of the motivations for me to submit this proposal, because if the docs are kept together, all these tools will continue working. Otherwise, they will simply break and modules will disappear. And this is another way to have a nice and fast search capability.
I see. So it could be something to where I imagine they may accept PRs for endpoint HTML that they are scraping. Are they scraping it from websites, or are they maybe building it from Sphinx docs?
I can look into that and
Okay.
post an update later.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that could be a good follow-up item, because I could see that depending on the direction we go, that could result in some also in some like action items for, hey, this may mean submitting maybe some PRs to their project, depending on how their project works. And I don't know if anyone on the call has experience with Inner Sphinx, but that's come up in a few conversations I've seen online of people trying to have
Some.
You have some, Pedro? Yeah. It's I do not have experience with it, but I've seen that it's been a way for people to.
You can cross-link between documentations, yes. So
Yeah.
the way Sphinx works is once it builds your documentation website, it actually creates kind of an index file, if you can call it. And then you can tell your project or your configuration of Sphinx. You can declare like a namespace, like for example, the salt documentation uses intersphinx to connect to the Python documentation. And so we reserve like the Python namespace, if you can call that. And when we want to try to link to the Python documentation, we use that namespace. And then we have to use the exact anchor on the Python documentation to link directly to that. That's the hardest bit, like figuring out the right linkage and all of that, but it's possible. And so any documentation project that is built using Sphinx has that specific kind of index that you can use to cross-link between documentations. So yeah, it's not as simple as one would like, but it's possible.
And I could see that being used as in relation potentially maybe with the stubs or with the where the core modules would be replaced with extensions. But this one other thing that I did see in Max that was listed in that GitHub discussion was the concern about like module clashing. And this, I had a conversation with Tyler recently where we talked actually about the same thing. Is an item land, they had this same problem where they were like, not we're creating all these plugins, but now we're introducing potential problems around colliding names, or even dependency tree conflicts. I just added this extension, but this other extension uses a different version of something, and now my stuff's borked. And what they had created was a centralized like poetry repo that pretty much just goes, hey, install all of these extensions listed and salt, all from like, let's say, a particular target master main branches, as a way to go, can the dependency tree resolution across all of our supported plugins actually play nice together, at least from a dependency tree standpoint? And that helped reveal issues where maybe they had conflicts across other extension plugins. But from a salt side of things, I guess it may still have the problem of going, okay, cool, everything installed, but now does salt still function? Do core things in salt still function as expected? I'm not quite sure about how to address some of those.
I think it's a good idea to have like one huge integration test, whether in the salt community extension organization, at least the installation part and maybe some basic operations would help detect some of the issues.
Yeah, I think that would be a cool idea. And because you could have a cron job scheduled, even GitHub workflow that is checking those. The problem then will be, hey, when it errors out, what were the extensions that caused the conflicts? To understand then which maybe repos need to have an issue raised. Those would be kind of like the maintenance follow-ups. But that would be the kind of wider range of if at least do these install together. Yeah, I guess we're getting close to the top of the hour. So I guess from a recap on some of those things, the minimal viable mention was, hey, let's look at maybe GitHub pages associated with those community extensions as a way of going, hey, is there an easy way to then link out to where the docs exist? And if repos could have GitHub pages. Actually, here's a question, Nick. From the Salt Extensions org perspective, is that on a free tier? And are you running into, as you're continuing to grow, are you running into issues with like minutes running out at all in relation to like GitHub Action Runner time?
Not yet. It is on the free tier, but we haven't hit any thresholds to date. And then regarding individual repository documentation, a couple of the early ones to come out in that org, like Azure RM and Prometheus, they do have read the docs pages. So like if we can have some sort of combination maybe of hey, we have a centralized place that's gonna point to other documentation sources, then maybe we could have some combination of GitHub pages and read the docs.
I was thinking the same thing because it would also save minutes on all the continuous docs builds if they were attempting to publish. And I know even GitHub pages has certain documented limitations on traffic and stuff. I don't imagine you're going to hit them, but I don't know what limitations they may have that you also would be able to avoid with having things on read the docs. But if your centralized page was simply a mix of, hey, this person decided to do GitHub pages, it could still hit the endpoint versus, and this one did read the docs, you could still hit that endpoint. Yeah, that sounds cool. So I could see that from a Oh, and then the other part that was listed by Pedro was we need to make sure to have a plan in place in relation to placeholders in the core docs as modules get pulled out, so that if we don't yet have a documentation endpoint, we at least should have a placeholder that mentions what's going on and where that module code now lives, such as in the great module migration or wherever those locations are where we're throwing those modules prior to them becoming extensions. Those seem to be the big ones. Does that sound about right? Kind of those seem to be the kind of big listing of, at least from an MVP side of things. Oh, the other thing is that it would be interesting in the future to look into Algolia. Because if we do have a centralized kind of jumping off page, the community, the SALT extensions working group may be eligible for a free Algolia usage because of the fact that it's a separate group that's not funded by Broadcom like how the main SALT org is. And that would mean being able to have a collective documentation search across all your decentralized doc sets. You know.
Cool. I think we have a list of things to do.
Agreed.
And although it does seem like a small list, it is not.
Good stuff.
So I'll definitely take it at the one that I've assigned to me to make sure that we hopefully automate the process, because I don't want to create a stub for every module that we remove. Like that's a waste of time. But worst case scenario, so be it. Yeah, I'll make sure that that one gets delivered. Potentially right after the PR from Daniel gets merged.
Cool. Well, we hit the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I know that some folks probably have some follow-on meetings to this one. Appreciate everybody coming out today, and our next meeting will be on the 4th of April, and it will be without Alyssa. So yeah, everybody say bye to Alyssa, and we'll see her on the 3rd Thursday of next month.
I
Bye,
don't.
Elisa.
Oh yeah, I might have to like have somebody else be the host of that meeting so that you can record, but I'll work out those details. So yeah, sounds good. All right. See you, everyone. Or is Shane gonna do a joke today? Or
I do have one. All right. When men refer to themselves as alpha males, I hear that in the context of software, where alpha versions are unstable, missing important features, filled with flaws, and not fit for the public.
Perfect.
nice. That's a good one. All right. Good stuff. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.